everybody. We're in the final stretch here. I would like to thank CTBUH for putting together such a wonderful event and inviting us to be a part of it. We really appreciate it, both being part of it, but getting to see all these wonderful projects. To begin with, Stephen would like to send his regards and his very sincere disappointment that he couldn't be here, but we do have a video, as was mentioned. To begin with, one of the things I wanted to mention about Poly is that we've had a very long relationship working with them, beginning back in around 2003. And this relationship and collaboration has really been very important, I think, to both organizations in the way we approach the projects together. Beginning with their headquarters, which is the image that you see on the left in the prior image. And then a few years later, we did the headquarters for their real estate division. And several other projects have ensued, and most recently, in terms of completion, is the Dawangjing Poly International Plaza, which you see on the right. And one of the things that you'll notice about these projects is all three of them are very, very different. And where that comes from is, I think, our search for a solution and a form that grows out of trying to address the specific issues of the project rather than coming to it with an a priori ideas. And I think what has made our interaction with Poly particularly fruitful for us has been the fact that the two companies really have a set of shared values when it comes to these projects. Poly International Plaza is a speculative office building, and what we wanted to do and what we were really encouraged to do by Poly was to challenge the typology of the speculative office building and try to really bring something new to it. So among those shared values, the first and foremost is the idea of human-centric design, that really thinking first and foremost about the individuals that will occupy the building, that will use the buildings, as well as the general public around that get to enjoy the environment around the buildings. A big part of this is how do we create a question or the question of vertical community. These buildings are large, they house many, many people. How do we create a sense of social engagement in a project of this scale? A big part of that is creating visual connectivity and opening up the spaces within the building so that people are connected not just physically through elevators or stairs, but actually visually, so they can see each other and they can also understand where they are in the building at any given moment and how to move about it. The idea of transforming place, that these projects have a responsibility really to not only create great, memorable places, but to actually transform the way people perceive and understand and interact with the urban environments in which they are located. And then lastly, and very importantly for us, is to do it in such a way that the language of the projects actually grows out of solving specific technical issues. And doing this in a way where the structural solutions, the performative design solutions are actually a visual part of the language of our projects. Oops. So this was one of the early renderings that we did for the project, and I think it captures very much one of the things that we wanted to address. We've sort of changed climates now from Singapore. We're in Beijing, where although having warm summers, it is, as all of you know, brutally cold in the winter, and air quality is a real challenge. So how do we create a place where people can actually feel comfortable and fulfilled in their indoor environments when the outside is inhospitable? And this was something that was very important to me because my mother actually is from Beijing, and I spent my whole life listening to stories about how difficult life was in the wintertime. So the project itself is located exactly halfway between the Forbidden City, representing the past, and the Capital Airport, representing the future. It's located immediately adjacent to the 5th Ring Road intersection with the Capitol Freeway. And you can see from this aerial one of the big challenges of the site, which is that the master plan to the southwest, you can see has this radial geometry. And yet, as good practice, all the residential buildings are oriented to the south. And so we have this clash of geometries occurring. And then that geometry encountering the geometry of the freeway system. And so when we looked closer at the site, one of the things that became a real challenge for us was how do we create a place where it would be inviting for people. You can see to our north and west there are residential buildings, again, these linear slab buildings, which we needed to protect for access to daylight. But one of the things that we saw right away was that rather than try to directly address the challenges of the geometry, that we had an opportunity, which is that there was an open space to the east, which actually is the green space buffer to the freeway, and then the main open space in the center of the development. And so the idea became, rather than try to build a building with a tower with podium, was to think of the buildings as pebbles in a green stream, and to allow the park to flow through the site and completely eliminate the podium, creating more park space for people to move about and enjoy. One of the things about the forms ultimately was that what the idea of being pebbles in a stream was actually became more than a metaphor, because as we did our detailed fluid dynamic wind analysis to see how the buildings would perform, how the ground level environment would feel for pedestrians, we had the benefit that the forms really allowed the winds to pass through and minimize a downdraft in this case, and create minimal turbulence in comparison to the much taller buildings immediately to our northwest. Now, when looking at an elliptical building for an office building, this sometimes seems like a challenge because of concerns for efficiency. And when we first looked at the layout, several things became apparent. One is we wanted to eliminate the space at the ends of the building, because those are the least efficient, most difficult to lay out for folks. The second thing is that the ends of the building also were very challenging from a structural standpoint, because of the shape of the building really tended to want to create a torsion in the building. So rather than going with a traditional column and shear wall system, which carries the lateral loads of the building through the building, in working with our structural engineers, we developed a diagrid system which actually takes the lateral loads around the perimeter of the building, allowing us to cut two large atriums, 29-story atriums at either end of the building, eliminating the least efficient space while also allowing us to create a more efficient structure. So when you start to look at a diagrid on an ellipse, though, the question became, do you create curved structural elements? And of course, that was something we did not want to do. So rather than having radial curving structural elements, they were flattened. And when we flattened them, this resulted in a form that allowed all the glazing to be flat as well. And that produced this faceted form that you see, that is the final form of the building. The interesting thing is that when we started talking about this with our engineers, we used this paper model to explain it. And what happened was the paper model naturally formed those facets. And it turns out that this is a natural structural phenomenon where the paper wants to relieve the stresses in the most natural way. And it creates this form, which was evocative of a Chinese lantern. And we thought that that was very appropriate, given having a lantern at the gateway to the city, a very traditional symbol of welcome. The structure itself was very, very carefully analyzed by our group. This illustrates the node intersections, which were analyzed very carefully for their stresses, as well as their constructability. The lower portions of the tower, the tubes are actually concrete filled, so it was very important to make sure that the concrete could flow smoothly through those nodes, as well as be easily constructible. The other aspect of this the system, and one of the things that really makes it unique, is that there is no, we wanted to keep the members in pure axial load, so there's no bending introduced into the structural members. And you can see that in the diagram at the bottom, where all the members are experiencing pure loads. The nodes are pre-manufactured, brought to the site. And then here you could see the overall structure. And the way we were able to avoid bending in those diagrid is that you'll see every other floor is actually suspended from the nodes above. So that actually made that system lighter and more efficient because it's in tension. And then the nodes are the only points at which load is being transferred into the diagrid, making it, again, very efficient. Now, with the diagrid, it actually gave us a second opportunity, and this was something that was very important, was how do we create a building where we maximize daylight while maximizing human comfort? With large panels of glass, particularly in the wintertime, we all know that the challenge is going to be cold. And so we introduced a double skin system, flat on the outside, vertical on the inside, sealed in the winter, and then ventilated in the summer to keep the building cool. Also, the intervening floors act as sun shading in order to protect the building during summer. The inside of the building, though, once we had the structure, was rather than fill it with floors the way you might with a conventional building, was to actually think of the different programmatic elements as pieces that can be inserted into the building, into the structural frame. So you have the traditional core and lease space and elevators, but then above that, what we did was in those atriums, introduce a series of social spaces, ways for people to connect. So stairways, gathering spaces, meeting rooms, courtyards, and additional atrium spaces. So in a section through the building, what you're seeing here are those two 29-story atriums with their special program elements suspended inside. At the top of the building is on either side is a winter garden on one side, and then an outdoor courtyard on the other side, bringing nature into the building and not just at the ground floor. So when you get to the top of the building here, if you were to take a cut through it, you see how connecting stairs and these sort of mini atriums with greenery in them create a very unique and special environment at the top of the building. And then at the very top of the building, rather than simply cantilevering the structure folds back on itself to create the crown, anchors itself back into the core and ties the whole structural system back together again. Now, one of the things about eliminating the podium is that then we had to contend with all of the car ramps, basement air systems, other kinds of emergency egress coming up through the landscape. And so what we developed with our colleagues at SWA, who did the landscape, was this idea of an undulating carpet of green that covers all of those functional elements. And so what you get is actually in this very flat terrain of Beijing, an area with topography covered with green. And then also allowed us to create openings to lower levels where all of the amenities for the users of the building are located. That gives us daylight as well as immediate outside access for those spaces. A view of the diagrid. A couple of special technologies were utilized in order to build this. One of the things about the system is that the geometry really drove itself. And so the nodes at the building, the cladding, actually, we borrowed from the aerospace and automotive industry their technologies for stretch forming metal. These are not simple curves. They're all compound curves and required special forming techniques. You can also see in this shot the ventilation at the floor, every other floor line. And then at the base of the building, how the glazing peels away to reveal the inner layer glazing for the lobby. So approaching the building, you approach at the narrow ends. The two narrow ends are aligned with the Capitol Freeway, so that when you're approaching, you see the narrow end, and that's, again, as you come out of elevators, you're either looking downtown towards Beijing or north towards the airport. In the evening. And one of the things about this form, again, in order to keep it pure and clean, simply by peeling away that outer layer glazing at the bottom, we negated the need for a canopy. So you really keep this idea of the lantern form as clean and pure as possible. As you enter through those doors, you're presented with a space, and this is one of the important ideas, by entering at the end of the building, it allows for this long view through the space rather than looking, being pressed up close to the core. You actually get this diagonal view out into the landscape. And if you look up into the atrium. And so immediately from that single point, you're able to understand and orient yourself both within the building, how it's put together, and how to move around. You move around the core, you see the diagrid coming to the ground, and then here we have the low iron glazing with cables to provide the lateral resistance and a very, very minimal clip so that you can maximize the sense of transparency and connectivity to the outside. And then moving into the elevator core where a backlit glass floor and ceiling helps your eye adjust as you move through the space. And then you move into the elevator core. As you come out of the elevators, you're at the ends of the atrium. So this is unusual because what you do is when you step out of the elevators, and this is true for all of the elevator banks, low, mid, and high, you're immediately presented with a view of the outside. And again, you're reconnected to the exterior and a sense of where you are in the city. This is one of the break areas. And then I think something that's very important to us is that in the desire to have a very glassy building, we want to also make sure that it's a good neighbor in a city and not a building that simply reflects light onto other buildings or reflects its environment. It has its own personality and its character is able to read through. And this faceting of the glazing allows for the building, as you can see, the panels are either alternatingly reflecting the ground or the sky, and constantly changing as you move around the building. So,
保利国际广场位于北京望京中央商务区的中心位置，其主塔楼联合周围几栋超高层写字楼，勾勒出该地区壮丽的天际线。保利国际广场塔楼以折纸灯笼为灵感的建筑形态，丰富了本项目建筑的外观肌理。车库斜坡道的双弧线缓和僵直的规矩和严肃感，带动起社区蓬勃的生气。主塔楼的斜交网格和吊柱结构营造出标准层的无柱空间，首层的超白玻璃拉锁幕墙凸显了室内外的透明度，扩大了大堂的尺度，而且增进了使用者与室外环境的互相的关系。望京地区拥有最高的商务地产的管理、租金和承租的价格费用。国际广场项目更进一步提高了邻近的项目，如保利中央公园、融科橄榄城、首开国风上端等的地产的价值。一个物业最好的情况是能够将整层楼进行出租，这样可以降低将楼层面积减小成小单位的需求，也鼓励大面积的使用。本项目电梯厅正对着南北的中庭，这个主中庭也作为通透明亮的交流空间。中庭设计延长了办公玻璃墙，进一步提升了宽阔明亮的办公体验。主塔楼独特的灯笼造型以及项目所占据的优越位置，吸引了许多租户的入住和游客到访。众多企业的进驻提高了该地区的商业热度，也提升了品牌价值。保利国际广场地块没有围墙和栏杆来与相邻的道路间区隔，强化了园区和邻区的连通性。3栋塔楼灵活性的布置，有利于从项目地块各个角落的路径寻向。作为国家首都的第2个中央商务区，望京区的规划和发展已经孕育出一个高密度的商务物业的开发地区，而保利国际广场便是该区吸引国际和当地金融的和高科技企业进驻的众多写字楼的龙头项目。作为长期的合作伙伴， SOM 的设计师们在合作过程当中所展现出的超高的专业水准和配合态度，也是本项目获得巨大成功的关键因素。
One thing I just wanted to mention was that when Stephen couldn't join us, I think it was really wonderful. He extended the invitation to speak to Mr. Chu, who started off the project as a junior project manager for the project, and over the course of 6 and 7 years really was the key to its realization. He stayed with the project and was on top of every issue, and he's now the vice general manager of the company in Beijing. So it's really a testament to really the key to the success of these projects is great partnerships, great collaborations with great clients, and in our case, this extended all the way down to everybody on the team. So With that, thank you very much.